Ethan Carter was a man who had everything: money, power, and a life of luxury. He owned a huge mansion, had expensive cars, and was respected in the business world. But despite all his wealth, he had never been known for kindness. His success had made him arrogant, and he believed that everything and everyone in his life was replaceable. In his grand mansion, he had a team of workers who kept everything in perfect order. Among them was Isabella, the young maid who worked tirelessly to earn a living. She was not from a rich background, but she was honest, hardworking, and had dreams of a better future. Unlike the other workers who feared Ethan, Isabella always carried herself with quiet dignity. She never expected kindness from him, but she never let his cold behavior break her spirit. One evening, there was a big party at the mansion. Important guests, music, and expensive wine filled the halls. Ethan, as always, was the center of attention, talking to powerful people and making deals. But after hours of drinking, the guests started leaving, and the house slowly became quiet. Ethan, slightly intoxicated, found himself wandering through the halls when he saw Isabella cleaning up the mess left behind. For the first time, he looked at her closely. She was different from the women he usually spent time with. There was something pure and genuine about her, something he wasn't used to. In that moment, he felt drawn to her. He started a conversation, something he had never done before. Isabella, surprised but polite, responded. She had always known him as her employer, someone distant and unapproachable. But tonight, he seemed different. One conversation led to another, and as the night grew darker, Ethan, caught up in the moment, let his guard down. He spoke about things he never shared with anyone: his struggles, his loneliness, and how despite all his wealth, something always felt missing. Isabella listened, not because she was trying to impress him, but because she had a kind heart. She understood pain, even if hers was different from his. That night changed everything. Ethan, used to getting what he wanted, saw Isabella as someone special. But to him, special didn't mean permanent. As time passed, he grew distant again, returning to his cold, powerful self. Isabella, however, knew that something had changed within her. Weeks later, she discovered she was pregnant. Shocked and afraid, she gathered all her courage and went to tell Ethan the truth. She stood in his grand office, her hands shaking. "I need to talk to you," she said softly. Ethan barely looked up from his papers. "Make it quick," he said, his voice indifferent. "I'm pregnant," she finally said. The room fell silent. For a moment, Ethan just stared at her, his face unreadable. Then his expression turned cold. "That's not my problem," he said flatly. Isabella felt her heart sink. "But this is your child," she whispered. Ethan leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "I don't care. You work for me, nothing more. You will leave this house immediately." Tears welled up in Isabella's eyes, but she refused to beg. Without another word, she turned and walked away, knowing she was now on her own. Isabella stepped out of the mansion with nothing but a small bag of clothes and a little money that Ethan had given her before forcing her to leave. The night was cold, and the streets felt unfamiliar. She had spent years working inside those grand walls, but now she had nowhere to go. Fear filled her heart, but she wiped away her tears. She had to stay strong, not for herself, but for the child growing inside her. She walked for hours, unsure of where to go. Her feet ached, and her body felt weak, but she kept moving. Finally, she found a small shelter for women in need. The place was crowded, and the beds were few, but at least she had a roof over her head for the night. Lying on the hard mattress, she placed a hand on her stomach. "I will take care of you," she whispered, "no matter what happens." The next morning, she woke up with a new determination. She couldn't stay in the shelter forever. She needed a place to live and a way to earn money. The problem was that jobs weren't easy to find, especially for someone in her condition. Many employers didn't want to hire a pregnant woman. Days turned into weeks, and she faced rejection after rejection. With no other choice, Isabella took whatever work she could find. She cleaned small restaurants, washed dishes, and even helped in a laundry shop. The work was tiring, especially as her belly grew bigger, but she never complained. Every penny she earned went towards saving for her child's future. She lived in a tiny one-room apartment with barely any furniture, but it was enough. There were nights when she felt lonely, nights when she thought about Ethan and wondered if he ever regretted his decision. But she quickly pushed those thoughts away. He had made his choice, and now she had to focus on hers. As months passed, the baby inside her kicked and moved, reminding her that she was not alone. She often spoke to her unborn child, telling him stories about the life she dreamed of giving him. "One day, you'll have everything you need," she promised. "You won't have to struggle like I do." One evening, after finishing a long shift at the laundry shop, she felt a sharp pain in her stomach. It was too early for the baby to arrive, but something felt wrong. Panic filled her as she realized she had no one to call, no family to help her. Holding her belly, she stepped outside and waved down a passing taxi. At the hospital, the nurses rushed to help her. "You need to rest," the doctor warned. "You're overworking yourself." But Isabella had no choice. If she didn't work, how would she survive? As she lay on the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, she made a silent promise. She would fight, no matter how hard life became. She would give her child a future, even if she had to sacrifice everything. After months of struggle and sacrifice, the day finally arrived. Isabella lay in the hospital bed, drenched in sweat, her body weak from hours of labor. The pain was unbearable, but she refused to give up. She had come too far, fought too hard. Then, at last, a tiny cry filled the room. Tears streamed down her face as the nurse placed a small, warm baby in her arms. "It's a boy," the nurse said with a smile. Isabella looked down at her son, his little fingers curling around hers. He was so small, so fragile, yet so perfect. In that moment, all the pain and hardships seemed to disappear. She kissed his tiny forehead and whispered, "Lucas, your name is Lucas." A hospital stay was short. Isabella couldn't afford to stay longer, so just 2 days later, she took her newborn son back to their tiny apartment. The room was cold, and there was barely any furniture, but Isabella didn't care. She wrapped Lucas in a blanket, held him close, and promised him that she would give him the best life she could. The days that followed were not easy. Lucas would wake up crying in the middle of the night, and Isabella, exhausted from work, would struggle to calm him down. She barely slept, but she never complained. Every morning, she left him with an old lady in the neighborhood who agreed to watch him while she worked. Then, she spent the day washing clothes, scrubbing floors, and doing whatever jobs she could find. Money was always tight. There were days when she had to choose between paying rent or buying food. Sometimes she would eat less just to make sure Lucas had enough milk. But no matter how hard things got, she never let her son see her struggle. She always smiled at him, always held him close, always made sure he felt loved. As Lucas grew, Isabella noticed something special about him. He was not like other children. Even as a toddler, he was curious about everything. He would sit for hours playing with objects, trying to figure out how they worked. At 3 years old, he could already recognize letters and numbers. At 5, he started reading simple books on his own. Isabella knew her son was gifted. She wanted to send him to the best school, but good schools cost money, money she didn't have. Still, she refused to let her son's talent go to waste. She found free learning programs, borrowed books from the library, and spent every spare moment teaching him. Lucas, in return, worked hard. He saw how much his mother struggled, how tired she was after long days at work, yet she never complained. He wanted to make her proud. One day, his teacher called Isabella to school. "Your son is exceptional," the teacher said. "With the right opportunities, he can achieve great things." Isabella's heart swelled with pride. She looked at Lucas, who smiled up at her with bright, determined eyes. She knew that no matter how hard life had been, she had done something right. Her son was special, and she would do everything in her power to help him succeed. As Lucas grew older, his hunger for knowledge only increased. While other children spent their free time playing, he was always reading, solving puzzles, or asking questions that even adults found difficult to answer. Isabella watched in amazement as her son's mind worked faster than his age. She knew he was special, but she also knew that talent alone wasn't enough. He needed opportunities. But opportunities were hard to come by when you were poor. The good schools demanded high fees, and Isabella barely had enough to cover their basic needs. She worked extra shifts, took on more cleaning jobs, and saved every penny, hoping that one day she could afford a better education for her son. Then one day, something unexpected happened. Lucas, who was now 10 years old, had been participating in a local library reading program. A businessman had come to visit the library that day, looking to support bright children from low-income families. The librarian, who had noticed Lucas's extraordinary skills, introduced him. "Lucas is one of the smartest kids we have here," she said. "He teaches himself things that even older students struggle with." Intrigued, the businessman gave Lucas a set of math and logic puzzles. To everyone's shock, he solved them in minutes. The businessman was impressed. "This boy needs a real chance," he said. "I know a school that offers scholarships for gifted students. Let me help you apply." When Isabella heard the news, she couldn't believe it. That night, she held Lucas close. "You see, my son, hard work always pays off," she whispered. "You are meant for great things." With the businessman's help, Lucas applied for the scholarship. The entrance exam was tough, meant for older students, but he passed with one of the highest scores ever recorded. Soon, he was admitted into an elite school, one filled with children from rich families, the kind of world he had never seen before. At first, it wasn't easy. Many of his classmates looked down on him because he came from a poor background. He didn't have fancy clothes, expensive gadgets, or a driver waiting outside to pick him up. But what he did have was intelligence and determination. Day by day, Lucas proved himself. He outperformed everyone in academics, won science competitions, and impressed his teachers. Slowly, the same students who once ignored him started noticing him. Some admired him, others envied him, but no one could deny his brilliance. Meanwhile, Isabella continued working tirelessly. She never let Lucas see how exhausted she was. She simply smiled and encouraged him, reminding him every day that he was destined for something bigger than the struggles they had faced. Years passed, and Lucas's reputation as a young genius grew. By the time he was 16, companies were already offering him internships. Universities were sending letters, hoping to recruit him. Isabella's heart swelled with pride. Her son was no longer just a poor boy from a struggling household. He was becoming a rising star, and though he had yet to meet the man who had abandoned them, fate had something planned. The day was coming when Ethan Carter would realize what he had lost. Lucas had come a long way from the small, struggling life he once knew. By the time he turned 20, he had not only graduated from one of the best universities, but had also started working on a groundbreaking business idea. With his sharp mind and relentless determination, he developed a technology company that quickly caught the attention of investors. What started as a small project turned into a multi-million-dollar empire within just a few years. Meanwhile, Isabella watched her son's success with teary eyes. She had spent years sacrificing everything for him, and now she saw her efforts bear fruit. Lucas never forgot his roots. No matter how wealthy he became, he always credited his mother for his achievements. He made sure she lived comfortably, buying her a beautiful house and giving her the life she had always dreamed of. While Lucas's success was rising, another man's fortune was crumbling, Ethan Carter. For years, Ethan had ruled the business world with confidence, believing that his wealth would last forever. But the times had changed. He made bad investments, trusted the wrong people, and slowly his once powerful company started collapsing. His name, once respected in the industry, was now associated with failure. Desperate to save his empire, Ethan searched for potential partners who could help him regain his lost power. One evening, he received an invitation to a prestigious business summit. It was an exclusive event where the world's top entrepreneurs and investors gathered. Ethan saw it as his last chance to make the connections he needed. On the night of the event, Ethan arrived at the grand venue, dressed in his finest suit, hoping to impress the powerful people in the room. As he glanced around, he noticed that everyone was talking about one name, Lucas Knight. Ethan had never heard of him before, but the excitement in the air was undeniable. People whispered about how this young entrepreneur had built a billion-dollar company from nothing. Some called him a genius, others called him the future of business. Curious, Ethan found a seat in the front row as the event's host took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host announced, "please welcome our keynote speaker, the brilliant mind behind the fastest-growing tech company in the world, Lucas Knight." The audience erupted in applause as a tall, confident young man walked onto the stage. Ethan leaned forward, eager to see the face of this rising star. But the moment his eyes met Lucas's, his heart stopped. There was something familiar about the young man. His sharp features, his determined gaze. It was as if he was looking at a reflection of his younger self. And then, realization hit him like a storm. This wasn't just any successful businessman. This was his son, the child he had abandoned. Shock flooded through Ethan as he sat frozen in his chair. He had spent years building an empire, only to lose it. And now, the son he had cast aside had risen higher than he could have ever imagined. Fate had brought them to the same room, but Ethan was no longer the powerful one. Lucas now held all the power, and Ethan had no idea what was about to happen next. Ethan sat frozen in his chair, unable to believe his eyes. The young man standing confidently on the stage, receiving applause from the most powerful business leaders in the world, was the same child he had once rejected. Lucas Knight, his own son, was now a name that commanded respect and admiration. As Lucas began his speech, Ethan listened, his heart pounding. Lucas spoke about his journey, about the struggles his mother had faced, and how he had built his success from nothing. Though he never mentioned Ethan's name, every word felt like a knife cutting through Ethan's pride. Ethan's mind raced with memories of the past. He remembered the night Isabella had stood before him, telling him she was pregnant. He remembered how coldly he had dismissed her, never thinking about what would happen to her or the child. Back then, he had believed he was untouchable. He had never imagined that one day, the same boy he had abandoned would rise higher than him. As the speech ended, the crowd gave Lucas a standing ovation. Ethan, still in shock, knew he had to talk to him. He needed to fix what he had broken, to find a way back into his son's life. But as he stood up, Lucas stepped off the stage and was immediately surrounded by people congratulating him. Ethan pushed through the crowd, his heart pounding. When he finally reached Lucas, he hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Lucas," he said, his voice uncertain. Lucas turned to look at him, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Ethan saw something in Lucas's eyes, a deep intelligence, but also a strength that came from years of struggle. He knew in that instant that Lucas was not the same helpless child he had abandoned. "It's me, Ethan Carter," he continued, searching for words. I'm your father." The people around them fell silent. Some looked surprised, others exchanged whispers. But Lucas remained calm. He crossed his arms and looked at Ethan, his face showing no emotion. "My father," Lucas repeated, his voice steady. "I don't remember having one." Ethan's throat went dry. "Lucas, listen. I made mistakes. I was young, foolish, but I want to make things right." Lucas let out a small, humorless laugh. "Make things right?" He shook his head. "Where were you when my mother was struggling? When we had no food? When she worked day and night just to keep us alive? You were too busy enjoying your perfect life. Ethan swallowed hard. I didn't know. You didn't care, Lucas interrupted. His voice was calm, but there was power in his words. And now that you've lost everything, you suddenly remember you have a son. Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. For the first time in his life, he felt truly powerless. Lucas took a deep breath and looked around at the people watching them. I didn't come here to talk about the past, he said. I came here to build the future. My future. Without you. And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving Ethan standing there, surrounded by people, yet more alone than ever before. Ethan sat frozen in his chair, unable to believe his eyes. The young man standing confidently on the stage, receiving applause from the most powerful business leaders in the world, was the same child he had once rejected. Lucas Knight, his own son, was now a name that commanded respect and admiration. As Lucas began his speech, Ethan listened, his heart pounding. Lucas spoke about his journey, about the struggles his mother had faced, and how he had built his success from nothing. Though he never mentioned Ethan's name, every word felt like a knife cutting through Ethan's pride. Ethan's mind raced with memories of the past. He remembered the night Isabella had stood before him, telling him she was pregnant. He remembered how coldly he had dismissed her, never thinking about what would happen to her or the child. Back then, he had believed he was untouchable. He had never imagined that one day, the same boy he had abandoned would rise higher than him. As the speech ended, the crowd gave Lucas a standing ovation. Ethan, still in shock, knew he had to talk to him. He needed to fix what he had broken, to find a way back into his son's life. But as he stood up, Lucas stepped off the stage and was immediately surrounded by people congratulating him. Ethan pushed through the crowd, his heart pounding. When he finally reached Lucas, he hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Lucas," he said, his voice uncertain. Lucas turned to look at him, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Ethan saw something in Lucas's eyes, a deep intelligence, but also a strength that came from years of struggle. He knew in that instant that Lucas was not the same helpless child he had abandoned. "It's me, Ethan Carter," he continued, searching for words. I'm your father." The people around them fell silent. Some looked surprised, others exchanged whispers. But Lucas remained calm. He crossed his arms and looked at Ethan, his face showing no emotion. "My father," Lucas repeated, his voice steady. "I don't remember having one." Ethan's throat went dry. "Lucas, listen. I made mistakes. I was young, foolish, but I want to make things right." Lucas let out a small, humorless laugh. "Make things right?" He shook his head. "Where were you when my mother was struggling? When we had no food? When she worked day and night just to keep us alive? You were too busy enjoying your perfect life." Ethan swallowed hard. "I didn't know." "You didn't care," Lucas interrupted. His voice was calm, but there was power in his words. "And now that you've lost everything, you suddenly remember you have a son." Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. For the first time in his life, he felt truly powerless. Lucas took a deep breath and looked around at the people watching them. "I didn't come here to talk about the past," he said. "I came here to build the future. My future. Without you." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving Ethan standing there, surrounded by people, yet more alone than ever before. Ethan sat in silence, processing Lucas's words. He had hoped for forgiveness, maybe even a second chance to be a father, but he realized now that some things could never be undone. Lucas was willing to help, but only as a businessman, nothing more. The bond between them had been broken long ago, and there was no going back. Lucas leaned back in his chair, his expression calm but firm. "I will invest in your failing company," he said, "but under one condition. You step down. You no longer have control over it." Ethan's heart sank. The company he had built, the empire he once ruled, would no longer be his. But what choice did he have? He was drowning in debt, and without Lucas's help, he would lose everything.